Commander Zarathiel stood on the bridge of her flagship, watching her home world burn. The beautiful blue and silver planet she had grown up on was now covered in black smoke and orange flames. Enemy ships moved across its surface like hungry, insects eating everything they touched. Her people were dying down there, and she could do nothing to stop it. The Korthek horde had come without warning 3 months ago. They swept through the outer colonies first, destroying everything in their path. The Velrani Empire had the best weapons and the strongest warriors in this part of the galaxy. They had never lost a war before. But the Korthek were different. They learned from every battle and changed their tactics. Every time the Velrani found a way to hurt them, the Korthek adapted and came back stronger. Zarathiel touched the crystal on her forehead that glowed with soft blue light. All Velrani had these crystals. They let her people speak to each other with their minds and share thoughts across great distances. Right now she could feel the pain and fear of her people on the planet below. Millions of voices crying out for help that she could not give. Her second in command, Captain Veltar, approached her with worry in his golden eyes. "Commander, we have received a strange message. It comes from a species we have never met before. They call themselves humans and say they come from a world called Earth." Zarathiel turned to look at him. In all her years as a warrior, she had never heard of humans. "What do they want?" "They offer to help us fight the Korthek. In return, they ask only for safe passage through our space to reach the Outer Rim territories." The idea seemed impossible. How could an unknown species help when the mighty Velrani Empire was failing? Zarathiel had seen her best warriors fall to Korthek weapons. She had watched entire fleets disappear into the dark between stars. What could these strangers possibly do? "Show me their message," she said. The main screen flickered and showed a face unlike any she had ever seen. The creature had pale skin and strange blue eyes, with no crystal in his forehead. He wore green and brown clothing that looked rough compared to the smooth armor of her people. When he spoke, his voice was deep and carried an odd confidence. "I am Lieutenant Colonel Jake Martinez of the Earth Defense Force. We have been watching your war with the Korthek from a distance. Our two species have never met, but we know what it means to fight for survival. We offer our help not because we are friends, but because the Korthek are a threat to all free peoples in this galaxy. Give us a chance to prove that humans can be useful allies." Baltar shook his head. "Commander, this creature looks primitive. Their technology appears crude. How can they help us when our advanced weapons have failed?" Zarathiel studied the human's face on the screen. There was something in his eyes that reminded her of her own people's warriors. It was the look of someone who had seen terrible things and survived them. She had learned to trust that look over many years of war. "Send a reply. Tell them we will meet with them, but they must come alone to our flagship." "Commander, that could be dangerous. We know nothing about these humans." "We know nothing about winning this war either," she replied. "Perhaps it is time to try something new." 2 days later, a small human ship docked with her flagship. Zarathiel waited in the main meeting room with her war council. When the door opened, she was surprised by what she saw. Jake Martinez was shorter than most Velrani, but he moved with the confidence of a born warrior. Behind him came 3 other humans, 2 males and 1 female. They all wore the same rough clothing and carried weapons that looked simple but well-maintained. Jake stepped forward and bowed his head in respect. "Commander Zarathiel, thank you for agreeing to this meeting. I know this must seem strange to you." His words were translated by a small device he wore on his ear. The Velrani had similar technology, but she was impressed that the humans had managed to learn their language so quickly. "It does seem strange," she admitted. "Your people are unknown to us. Your technology appears limited. Why do you think you can help where we have failed?" Jake smiled and the expression was not what she expected. There was no arrogance in it, only a grim understanding of what war really meant. Because we are very good at killing things that need to die, and because sometimes the best weapon is not the most advanced one, but the one your enemy does not expect. He activated a small device, and holographic images filled the air between them. The images showed battles from Earth's history. Zarathiel watched in fascination and horror as humans fought wars with weapons that seemed almost primitive. But there was something in their tactics that made her pause. They did not fight like the Vilrani, with honor and noble traditions. They fought like animals backed into a corner, using every trick and advantage they could find. This is how humans wage war, Jake said quietly. We do not fight fair. We do not give our enemies the battles they expect. We study them, we learn their weaknesses, and then we exploit those weaknesses without mercy. One of her war council members, General Mordak, spoke up with disgust in his voice. This is not warfare. This is barbarism. Jake turned to look at him with those strange blue eyes. Yes, it is. And sometimes barbarism is exactly what you need to win. Zarathiel felt something stir in her mind as she watched the human images. Perhaps this crude warrior was right. Perhaps the Velrani had been too focused on fighting with honor while their enemies fought to win. The Korthik certainly showed no honor when they burned worlds and killed civilians. What do you propose? She asked. Give us a chance to study your enemy. Let us fight alongside your forces in one battle. If we prove useful, we continue the partnership. If not, we leave your space as promised. The War Council erupted in angry voices, but Zarathiel held up her hand for silence. She looked at Jake Martinez and saw something in his face that gave her hope for the first time in months. Maybe these primitive humans could teach her people something about survival. Very. Well, she said, you will have your chance. The first joint battle came sooner than anyone expected. Korthak forces had attacked a Velrani supply depot on the moon of Felmara. The depot contained weapons and food needed for the defense of 3 colony worlds. If it fell, those worlds would be defenseless against the next wave of attacks. Zarathiel led her forces in the traditional Velrani way. Her ships formed perfect battle lines with their energy shields glowing bright blue. The plan was simple and honorable. Approach the enemy directly, engage them in combat, and defeat them through superior firepower and tactics. Jake Martinez had a different idea. While the Velrani fleet approached from the front, his small force of human ships moved around to the side. Zarathiel watched through her ship's sensors as the humans did something she had never seen before. They turned off their engines and let themselves drift through the asteroid field that surrounded the moon. They moved like ghosts, hidden among the rocks and debris. The battle began as all Velrani battles did, with formal challenges broadcast on all frequencies. The Korthik responded with their usual wordless aggression, launching waves of attack ships at the approaching Velrani fleet. Zarathiel's forces met them head-on, energy beams lighting up the darkness of space. For the first few minutes, it seemed like any other battle. The Velrani held their formations and traded fire with the enemy. But something was wrong. The Korthik seemed too ready for their tactics. Enemy ships moved to counter every Velrani maneuver before it was even completed. Then, Jake's voice came through the communication system. Commander, they have been watching you fight for months. They know exactly what you are going to do before you do it. But they have never seen humans fight. Suddenly, the space around the Korthik supply ships erupted in explosions. The humans had used the asteroid field to get close without being detected. But instead of attacking with energy weapons like the Velrani, they launched crude metal projectiles and chemical explosives. The Korthik shields, designed to stop energy beams, offered no protection against solid objects moving at incredible speed. Zarathiel watched in amazement as human tactics tore through enemy formations. They did not fight in neat lines or follow traditional battle plans. Instead, they moved in small groups, appearing and disappearing like hunting animals. When the Korthik tried to corner them, the humans would scatter and regroup somewhere else. When the enemy expected them to retreat, they would suddenly charge forward with weapons firing. During the chaos of battle, Zarathil's own ship came under heavy attack. Korthik fighters had broken through the Velrani formation and were targeting command vessels. Her shields were failing, and her weapons were damaged. The bridge filled with smoke, and the lights flickered as power systems struggled to keep working. That was when Jake Martinez saved her life. His fighter appeared from nowhere, spinning and diving between enemy ships like a metal dancer. Instead of trying to destroy the Korthik fighters, he used his ship to confuse their targeting systems. He flew patterns that made no sense according to military tactics, but somehow drew enemy fire away from Zarathil's damaged vessel. "Commander, get your ship out of there," his voice crackled through the communication system. "I will keep them busy." Zarathil wanted to refuse. Velrani commanders did not abandon battles or let others take risks for them. But she could see that Jake's strange tactics were working. The Korthik fighters were so focused on trying to hit his erratically moving ship that they had stopped attacking her flagship. "All ships retreat to safe distance," she ordered her fleet. It was the first time in her military career she had given such a command during active combat. As her ship pulled back, she watched Jake continue his impossible dance with death. Fighter was taking damage from enemy fire, but he kept moving in patterns that defied all logic. Smoke trailed from his engines and his shields flickered, but he did not retreat. Then other human ships joined the fight. They came from different directions, using tactics that seemed to have no structure or planning. But Zarathil began to see the truth behind their apparent chaos. Every move was calculated to create maximum confusion among the enemy. The humans fought like a pack of hunting beasts, each one knowing instinctively where the others would be. Battle ended when human explosives destroyed the main Korthik command ship. With their central coordination gone, the remaining enemy forces retreated in disorder. The supply depot was saved, and for the first time in months, the Velrani had won a complete victory. Later, on board Zarathil's flagship, Jake Martinez stood before the War Council to explain human tactics. His uniform was torn, and he had a cut on his forehead, but his eyes still held that strange confidence. "Your people fight with honor," he said. "That is admirable, but it makes you predictable. The Korthik have learned to read your patterns. They know that Velrani ships will always approach in formation, that your commanders will always lead from the front, that you will never retreat until your shields fail." General Mordak interrupted with anger in his voice. "Are you saying we should abandon our traditions? Fight without honor like animals?" Jake looked at him with what might have been pity. "I am saying that dead warriors have no honor at all. Your traditions are beautiful, but they will not save your people if you lose this war." Zarathil found herself studying the human warrior's face. He had risked his life to save hers during the battle, asking for nothing in return. That was the action of an honorable warrior, even if his methods seemed strange. "What do you suggest?" she asked. "Let us teach your people new ways to fight, not to replace your traditions, but to give you more options. The Korthik are learning to counter your standard tactics. We need to give them new problems to solve." Over the next several weeks, human instructors worked with Velrani forces. They taught techniques that had no names in the Velrani language: ambush tactics, psychological warfare, and the art of making the enemy react instead of act. Zarathil, as warriors, learned to move in small groups, to use terrain for concealment, and to attack weak points instead of meeting enemy strength with strength. At first, Many Velrani officers resisted these lessons. The tactics seemed crude and dishonorable compared to their ancient traditions. But as they began to win battles that would have been losses before, attitudes started to change. Zarathiel found herself spending more time with Jake Martinez, learning about human military, history, and philosophy. She was fascinated by stories of Earth's wars, conflicts where humans had faced extinction and survived through determination and adaptability. "Your people have never known peace," she observed during one of their conversations. "No," Jake agreed. "We have always been fighting someone or something. Other humans, nature, our own limitations. Maybe that is why we are good at it. Do you ever wish for peace?" Jake was quiet for a long moment. Every day. But wishing for something and being prepared for reality are different things. The universe is a dangerous place. The strong survive by being ready for whatever comes. Zarathiel began to understand that human brutality was really just practical thinking. They did whatever worked, without worrying about whether it looked noble or followed ancient rules. In a war for survival, maybe that was exactly what her people needed to learn. The war grew worse as months passed. The Korthik brought new weapons from the deep space beyond the galaxy's edge. These weapons could crack planets and turn stars into dying embers. Entire systems went dark as the enemy advanced toward the heart of Velrani space. Zarathiel and Jake had become an effective team. Their combined forces won battle after battle, using tactics that mixed human cunning with Velrani technology. But for every victory, the Korthik seemed to have 10 new ships ready to take the place of those destroyed. The crisis came during the siege of Mortala, a fortress world that guarded the main shipping routes to the Velrani capital. The planets. Massive defense stations could hold off any normal attack, but the Korthik had brought something new. They had ships that could phase in and out of normal space, peering inside the defensive perimeter without warning. Zarathiel commanded the orbital defense, while Jake led ground forces on the planet's surface. The battle raged for 6 days, without rest. Velrani and human warriors fought side by side as Korthik forces tried to overwhelm their positions through sheer numbers. On the 7th day, disaster struck. A Korthik phase ship materialized directly above the human command bunker and began dropping soldiers onto the planet's surface. Jake's forces were cut off from reinforcement and surrounded by enemies that seemed to appear from thin air. Zarathiel made a decision that went against every rule of military command. She left her flagship in the hands of her second officer and took a small force down to the planet's surface. Her war council protested, saying that fleet commanders should never abandon their posts during battle. But she could not stand by and watch Jake's forces be destroyed. She found the human positions under heavy attack. Jake was wounded, blood running down his arm from a Korthik energy weapon, but he was still fighting. He had positioned his remaining soldiers in a defensive circle around a group of Velrani civilians who had been caught in the battle zone. "What are you doing here?" he shouted over the sound of weapons fire. "You should be commanding the fleet. The fleet can fight without me for a while," she replied, activating her energy rifle. "These people cannot defend themselves without us." Together they held the position as Korthik soldiers attacked in waves. Zarathiel had never fought so close to an enemy before. Velrani warfare usually happened at long range, with energy weapons and guided missiles. But here she was close enough to see the alien faces of her enemies, close enough to hear their strange battle cries. During a brief pause in the fighting, Jake collapsed from blood loss. Zarathiel knelt beside him and saw that his wound was worse than she had thought. The Korthik energy weapon had burned deep into his shoulder, and the injury was not healing properly. "I need to get you to medical treatment," she said. "No time," he gasped. "They will attack again soon. The civilians need protection." Zarathiel looked at the frightened faces of the Velrani families, huddled behind their defensive wall. There were children among them, their crystal foreheads glowing with fear. She had sworn an oath to protect all Velrani people, but she had also grown to care about this stubborn human warrior, who always put others before himself. Without thinking about the consequences, she reached out with her mind and touched Jake's. Thoughts. Mental contact between Velrani and other species was supposed to be impossible, but somehow she found his consciousness floating in a sea of pain and determination. Through their connection, she felt his memories. She saw his childhood on Earth, a world scarred by wars, but still beautiful. She felt his grief for friends lost in battle, and his fierce love for the people he protected. Most surprising of all, she felt his growing affection for her, a feeling he had never spoken aloud. The mental link worked both ways. Jake experienced her memories of growing up as a warrior princess, trained from birth to lead her people in battle. He felt her loneliness at the top of the military hierarchy and her fear that she was not strong enough to save her civilization. He also felt something else, a warmth toward him that matched his own feelings. When their minds separated, both warriors stared at each other in shock. Mental bonding between Velrani was sacred, something done only between life partners. For it to happen with an alien species should have been impossible. Did we just ... Jake started to say. I do not know, Zarathiel replied. I have never heard of such a thing. Before they could discuss what had happened, the Korthik attacked again. But something had changed. Zarathiel found that she could sense Jake's tactical instincts without him speaking. He seemed to know where she would move before she decided. Their fighting styles, so different before, now worked together like parts of a single weapon. They held the position until reinforcements arrived. The battle for Mortala was won, but at a terrible cost. Half the planet's surface was damaged, and thousands of warriors from both species had died. As medical teams treated the wounded, Zarathiel and Jake finally had a chance to talk about their strange mental connection. In human culture, we have legends about soulmates, Jake said as a medic bandaged his shoulder. People who are meant to be together across all obstacles. But they are just stories. The Velrani have similar legends, Zarathiel replied. But our stories say that true bonding only happens once in a lifetime, and only between those who are perfectly matched in spirit. They were interrupted by the arrival of Captain Lisa Park, Jake's second in command. She was a tough woman with short brown hair and suspicious eyes. She had been watching the growing relationship between her commander and the alien leader with obvious concern. Sir, we need to talk, she said to Jake, in private. Jake nodded and followed her to a quiet corner of the medical station. Zarathiel could not hear their conversation, but she could sense Jake's emotions through their mental link. Lisa was warning him about the dangers of emotional involvement during wartime. She thought his feelings for Zarathiel would compromise his judgment and put human soldiers at risk. At the same time, Zarathiel received an urgent message from the Velrani High Command. They had heard reports about her unorthodox tactics and her close cooperation with human forces. Some leaders were beginning to question whether the alliance with humans was wise. They worried that prolonged contact with such aggressive aliens might corrupt Velrani culture and traditions that the pressure from both sides forced Jake and Zarathiel to maintain professional distance in public. They could not show their growing feelings without causing problems for their respective forces. But the mental connection remained, growing stronger each day. During battles, they could coordinate their tactics with perfect precision. In quiet moments, they shared thoughts and emotions that neither could express in words. The war continued to escalate. Intelligence reports indicated that the Korthik were preparing for a final assault on the Velrani capital system. They had gathered the largest fleet ever seen, with enough firepower to crack planets and boil away entire atmospheres. If they succeeded, the Valorni Empire would cease to exist and billions of people would die. Both warriors knew that the coming battle would require sacrifices beyond anything they had faced before. The question was whether their strange bond would be strong enough to survive what was coming, or whether duty and tradition would force them apart just when they needed each other most. High Admiral Kethmer arrived at the front lines with the largest Valorni fleet ever assembled. His massive flagship dwarfed even Zarathiel's command vessel, and his reputation as the Empire's greatest military mind preceded him like a storm cloud. He was old even by Valorni standards, his crystal forehead dim with age, but his tactical genius was legendary. Zarathiel stood at attention in his private chambers, feeling like a young cadet again. Kethmer studied her with golden eyes that had seen 1,000 battles. Behind him stood the sacred keepers, Valoroni priests, who maintained the ancient knowledge and prophecies of their people. "Commander Zarathiel," Kethmer said in a voice like distant thunder, "you have done well with the resources given to you. Your alliance with these humans has produced unexpected results. But the time for improvisation is over. I have brought the weapons needed to end this war." He activated a holographic display that showed plans for something called the Soul Fire Weapon. Zarathiel had heard whispers of such devices in the ancient texts, but she had thought they were myths. The weapon could reach across space itself and burn the life force from entire star systems. Nothing could defend against it because it attacked the very essence of existence. "The soul fire requires a psychic trigger," one of the sacred keepers explained. "Only the most powerful Valorni telepaths can activate such a weapon. The process channels the combined will of our entire species through a single mind." Zarathiel felt a chill run through her body. What happens to the telepath who serves as the trigger? "They become one with the weapon," Kethmer said simply. "Their consciousness burns out like a star going nova, but their sacrifice saves millions of lives." The implications were clear. Someone would have to die to use the soul fire, and Zarathiel was one of the few Valorni with psychic abilities strong enough to serve as the trigger. She had suspected this moment would come ever since the ancient prophecies began circulating among the fleet commanders. "I volunteer for the honor," she said, though the words felt like lead in her mouth. "I expected nothing less," Kethmer replied. "But first, we must deal with your human allies. They have served their purpose, but they are too dangerous to remain in our space after the war ends. Their aggressive nature and primitive tactics could corrupt our people if prolonged contact continues." Zarathiel wanted to protest, but she knew it would be pointless. Kethmer had already made his decision. The humans would be dismissed as soon as the Korthic threat was eliminated. Jake and his people would be sent back to their own territory, and she would never see them again. That night, she met Jake in secret aboard damaged supply ship drifting between the two fleets. The mental connection they shared made such meetings possible without detection. She could guide him to locations where they could speak privately without arousing suspicion from either command structure. "They want to use the soul fire," she told him without preamble. Jake's face went pale. The humans had been studying Valorani technology, and he understood what the weapon could do. How many people will it kill? Everyone in a dozen star systems. The Korthic fleet, their support colonies, and any inhabited worlds in the targeting area. Billions of beings reduced to ash in moments, and the person who fires it, Zarathiel met his eyes, dies in the process. Jake was quiet for a long time, staring out at the stars visible through the ship's damaged hull. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with emotion. "There has to be another way. Kethmer believes this is the only certain method of victory. The Korthic have adapted to every other weapon we possess. They cannot adapt to something that attacks their very souls. What about the prophecies your people talk about? The ones that say salvation will come through unity with an unlikely ally? Zarathiel smiled sadly. Kethmer thinks you humans were that ally. Your tactics helped us survive long enough to bring the soul fire to bear. The prophecy has been fulfilled. That is not what the prophecy says, Jake replied with growing intensity. I have been studying your ancient texts with the help of translation programs. The prophecy speaks of a bond deeper than blood or telepathy. It talks about two spirits becoming one to face the darkness. He took her hands in his, and she felt the warmth of his skin against her own. Through their mental link, she could sense his desperation and determination. He was not willing to accept her death as inevitable. I have a plan, he said. It is dangerous, and it might not work, but it does not require anyone to die. Over the next hour, Jake outlined his alternative strategy. Instead of using the soul fire to destroy the Korthek fleet, they would use coordinated human and Velorni tactics to disable the enemy command structure. The plan required perfect timing and absolute trust between the two forces. Most importantly, it required Zarathiel to serve as a telepathic link between all ships in the combined fleet. She would have to open her mind completely to Jake, allowing him to coordinate human forces through her mental connection to Velorani commanders. The level of mental intimacy required was unprecedented and potentially dangerous. In Velorni culture, she explained, complete mental bonding is reserved for life partners. It is considered sacred, more intimate than any physical connection. If I open my mind to you in that way, there will be no going back. I understand, Jake said, and I am willing if you are. Zarathiel studied his face in the dim light of the emergency power systems. She had grown to trust this human warrior, more than anyone in her own species. He had saved her life multiple times and shown a courage that matched any Velorani hero. More than that, she had felt his thoughts and knew the depth of his feelings for her. The plan will only work if we can. Convince both fleets to follow our lead instead of Kethmer's orders, she said. Leave that to me, Jake replied with a grim smile. Humans are very good at convincing people to try desperate plans. They spent the rest of the night refining the details of their strategy. By dawn, they had created a battle plan that could save billions of lives without requiring anyone to sacrifice themselves. The only question was whether they could implement it before Kethmer activated the soul fire weapon dot as they prepared to return to their respective fleets. Jake caught Zarathiel's hand one more time. Whatever happens in the coming battle, I want you to know that meeting you has been the greatest honor of my life. And you have shown me that true strength comes not from tradition or technology, but from the willingness to protect those we care about, she replied. They parted knowing that the next time they met, it would be in the middle of the largest space battle in galactic history. Their plan would either save two civilizations or result in the destruction of everything they had fought to protect. The fate of billions of lives now rested on the bond between a Velorani commander and a human warrior who had learned to trust each other across the vast differences between their species. The final battle began at dawn on the 7th day of the month of Star's End. The Korthek fleet emerged from hyperspace like a plague of metal locusts, their ships blotting out the stars with their sheer numbers. High Admiral Kethmer's forces waited in perfect formation, ready to deploy the soul fire weapon that would end the war in fire and death. But Zarathiel and Jake had spent the night convincing key commanders from both fleets to try their alternative plan. It had not been easy. Many Velorani officers saw the human strategy as dishonorable, while human soldiers worried about trusting alien telepathy in the heat of battle. Only the desperate nature of their situation had made agreement possible. As the enemy fleet approached, Zarathiel sat in her command chair with her eyes closed, preparing for the most dangerous mental connection of her life. Jake was aboard his flagship several thousand kilometers away, but through their shared consciousness, he felt closer than her own heartbeat. "Are you ready?" His voice whispered through their mental link. "No," she replied honestly. "But I trust you." She opened her mind completely, dropping every mental barrier she had been taught to maintain since childhood. The sensation was like stepping naked into a hurricane of thought and emotion. Jake's consciousness rushed into hers, and for a moment she feared they would both be destroyed by the intensity of their connection. Then somehow they found balance. Their two minds merged into something greater than either could achieve alone. Through Zarathiel's telepathic abilities, Jake could sense the location and intent of every ship in the Vellerny fleet. Through Jake's tactical instincts, Zarathiel could predict enemy movements with impossible accuracy. The battle began with traditional Vellerny tactics. Kethmar's forces advanced in formation, preparing to get close enough to deploy the soulfire weapon. But as the Korthic fleet moved to counter them, something unexpected happened. Half the Vellerny ships suddenly broke formation and scattered in seemingly random directions. The Korthic had learned to predict Vellerny battle patterns over months of warfare. They moved to exploit what appeared to be a catastrophic breakdown in enemy coordination. But the scattered ships were not running away. They were moving into positions calculated by the merged consciousness of Jake and Zara Thiel-human ships appeared from their hiding places in asteroid fields and nebulae, using stealth tactics that the Korthic had never encountered before. Instead of meeting enemy strength with strength, they struck at weak points in the Korthic formation. Vellerny energy weapons, guided by human cunning, found gaps in enemy defenses that should not have existed. The battle became a dance of destruction, choreographed by two minds working as one. Every move by Allied forces was perfectly coordinated, every attack precisely timed. The Korthic found themselves fighting an enemy that seemed to anticipate their every decision, but the mental strain on Zarathiel was enormous. Maintaining telepathic contact with hundreds of ships while merged with Jake's consciousness pushed her abilities far beyond safe limits. She could feel her mind beginning to fracture under the pressure. "I cannot hold this much longer," she gasped through their mental link. "Just a little more," Jake replied, his own consciousness burning with shared pain. "We are almost there." The climax came when the Korthic command ship, a massive vessel the size of a small moon, moved toward the center of the battle. High Admiral Kethmar saw his chance to deploy the soulfire weapon and began charging the ancient systems. But Jake and Zarathiel had anticipated this moment. Using their merged consciousness, they coordinated a precision strike involving dozens of ships from both fleets. Human kinetic weapons and Vellerny energy beams converged on the Korthic flagship from 12 different directions simultaneously. The enemy shields held for exactly 3 seconds. Then the combined firepower of two species, guided by perfect tactical coordination, pierced through to the ship's core. The explosion lit up half the star system as the Korthic command vessel died in nuclear fire dot with their central coordination. Destroyed, the remaining Korthic forces fell into chaos. Some ships fled toward deep space, while others fought on without organization or purpose. The battle was won, but the victory came at a terrible cost. The psychic feedback from coordinating. Such a massive engagement burned through Zarathiel's mind like liquid fire. She felt her consciousness fragmenting, pieces of her identity scattering like leaves in a storm. Jake tried to hold her together through their mental link, but the damage was too severe. Both warriors collapsed unconscious as their ship's medical teams rushed to save them. For 3 days, they lay in coma while doctors from both species worked to repair the neurological damage caused by their unprecedented mental merger. When Zarathiel finally awakened, the first thing she felt was Jake's presence in her mind. Their connection had not been severed by unconsciousness. If anything, it had grown stronger. She could sense his thoughts and emotions as clearly as her own, and she knew he could feel hers in return. "Is this permanent?" she asked the Valrani doctor who was monitoring her condition. "We do not know," the physician replied with wonder in her voice. "Nothing like this has ever been recorded in our medical texts. According to our instruments, your brain patterns have synchronized with the humans. You appear to be sharing a single consciousness distributed across two bodies." Jake awoke an hour later with the same mysterious condition. Their minds were permanently linked in a way that defied scientific explanation. They could communicate without words, coordinate actions without planning, and share experiences across the vast distances of space. High Admiral Kethmer came to visit them in the medical bay. The old warrior looked at the two of them with something approaching awe. "The ancient prophecies spoke of this," he said quietly. "A joining of spirits that would herald a new age for our people. I did not believe such things were possible." He activated a holographic display showing passages from the oldest Valrani texts. The words spoke of two warriors from different worlds, whose bond would become the foundation for lasting peace between species. Their union would prove that cooperation was stronger than conquest, that trust could overcome any barrier. "It seems," Kethmer continued, "that you too have fulfilled the deepest prophecy of our civilization. The question now is what you will do with this gift." Over the following weeks, as both fleets worked to establish permanent peace in the region, Jake and Zarathiel discussed their future. Their unique mental connection made them ideal ambassadors between their peoples. They could understand both human pragmatism and Valrani honor, translating between cultures in ways no one else could achieve. Jake chose to remain with the Valrani fleet as a permanent military advisor, helping to integrate human tactical concepts with traditional Valrani strategies. Zarathiel accepted a position as the first Valrani ambassador to Earth, where she would help establish formal diplomatic relations between the two species. Their bond served as living proof that cooperation between different civilizations was not only possible, but could create something greater than either species could achieve alone. The war with the Korthik had ended not through superior firepower or ancient weapons, but through the courage of two individuals who had learned to trust each other completely. In the final scene of their story, Jake and Zarathiel stood together on the observation deck of a joint human Valrani exploration vessel. Through the transparent hull, they could see ships from both fleets working side by side to rebuild the worlds damaged by war. "When I first met you, I thought humans were primitive and violent," Zarathiel said, her hand resting in his. "And I thought the Valrani were too rigid and traditional to survive in a hostile galaxy," Jake replied. "We were both wrong." "No," she corrected with a smile. "We were both incomplete. Together, we became something stronger." They looked out at the stars, knowing that their peoples would face new challenges in the years ahead. But they also knew that the bond they had forged in battle would serve as a bridge between worlds, proof that even the most unlikely partnerships could overcome any obstacle when built on trust, courage, and the willingness to sacrifice for something greater than oneself. The human warrior she had trusted had indeed turned out to be her chosen partner, not just in war, but in the greater battle to build a future where different species could live and work together among the stars.